So, to some in-depth coverage on Ruby Franke appearing in court today, what this means for the future of Ruby Franke, but also her business partner, Jodi Hildebrandt. Before we show you how things look here, just to set the stage on things, Ruby Franke appeared in court today on alleged charges of child abuse, 6 aggravated child abuse charges. Those are second-degree felonies. She pleaded guilty to 4 of them, so no longer alleged. This was part of a plea deal that also featured other things. We'll talk about that with Amanda Gilbert here in just a few minutes. Also, Jake Taylor joining us to talk about that plea agreement and some of the language in there that actually details the explanation behind these charges. Paul Nelson will join us in a few minutes to look forward to what is happening with Jodi Hildebrandt, because there's another hearing in the works for about 10 days from now. So we are live outside of the 5th District Courthouse here in St. George. The sun has set and it's relatively quiet here. To be honest with you, it has been quiet all day. The courtroom was quiet, mostly media and family. Over here, this sidewalk, just where it meets the bend over there, that's where we talked to the prosecution. And we talked to them earlier today. You will hear from the Washington County attorney in just a few minutes with what he had to say. So as we come back here in front of the courthouse, Amanda Gilbert was in the courtroom with me earlier today. She listened to the hearing. She was there taking notes, of course, and also processing the emotion in the courtroom. She's joining us live from Purgatory Correctional Facility. That is about 15 minutes from here in Hurricane. Amanda, we were sitting, side by side as all of this went down. But what did you take away as the key points from inside the courtroom today?
Well, Brian, first I want to address too, I'm here at the correctional facility because Ruby Franke is back here tonight after appearing in court earlier today. Now, the hearing itself actually didn't last long, about 5 to 10 minutes. But what was really big about today is we actually heard from Ruby Franke for the first time since the arrest. She spoke a little bit while pleading guilty. Here's what she had to say. We're going to show you that.
And to count 6 aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
Yeah, you can see that there, Ruby Franke showing remorse. Also, one thing I wanted to note, when she walked into the courtroom today, she did smile at her parents and sister who were there. Just a very quiet courtroom. Ruby's family, she did have some of her family there. They entered and left the courtroom together. They did not talk to media before or after about what happened today. But I do know that this today felt a lot of we talked about this, Brian. It felt like a formality. We know a lot of what happened in that courtroom. It had already been talked about, discussed. Ruby Franke herself said she signed a plea agreement on the 18th. So this was something that just kind of had been worked on for some time. Back to you, Brian.
Amanda, thank you. And you're right. We knew this last week after getting a statement from Ruby's attorney, Lamar Windward, about moving forward. Most of the statement was either regret and then pointing the finger at Jodi Hildebrandt. A small portion did mention that they were hoping to resolve this situation with a plea agreement and ultimately admitting guilt. Now, the prosecution worked on this for a number of months, and they, of course, went through discovery in this case and then shared that with the defense attorney, and that's how they came together. We did hear from the prosecutor in this case, the Washington County attorney, Eric Clark, shortly after he walked out of the courtroom and addressed the media. Here are some of the things that he spoke about.
She will remain incarcerated awaiting sentencing, which will occur, and the date was February 20th, I believe. We are pleased that Mrs. Franke has accepted responsibility for criminal actions and that justice is being served to the extent possible in this type of a situation. We're grateful for the law enforcement officers, caseworkers, Children's Justice Center staff, and others that have been instrumental in the fair and speedy resolution of this case. Because the alleged facts of the ongoing case involving Jodi Hildebrandt are intertwined with this case, our office will not be making additional statements to the media at this time. She agrees to testify truthfully against Jodi Hildebrandt, and in return, the Washington County Attorney's Office agrees to remain neutral regarding future hearings before the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole. Each count is a 1 to 15-year term, but under the Utah sentencing guidelines, that's all flexible and up to the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole.
Will they know that more in February during her sentencing?
No. So in February, she'll be sentenced, and then the Board of Pardon and Parole will hold a review hearing and that typically happens about 6 months after people go to prison. And at that point, they set the date for the next review hearing, but that's all up to them and how they handle that.
Any time served count towards that?
Typically, almost always time served counts towards that.
Couple things to take away there. As we are understanding with the plea agreement, you can see it in writing in the documents, which we'll get to Jake Taylor in just a moment. But as you understand it here, Ruby will testify if that opportunity presents itself with Jodi Hildebrandt. That was part of the plea. Also, we don't know how long her prison sentence will be because it could take up to 6 months. A little bit of elaboration there with the Washington County Attorney Eric Clark. Interestingly enough, the courthouse behind me, just next door, is Ruby Frankie's attorney's office. We were hoping to have a conversation with them today. We worked out some details late last week. We were here with the opportunity to speak with them today on the record, kind of about their feelings of how things went today and obviously feeling what was going to happen with Ruby in the future. But also we wanted to learn, how did things get to this point? We were hoping a lot of those things would be on the table today, but they ultimately declined. We did have the chance to sit down with them in their office today, just talk about some things, mostly in background knowledge, but they did share a statement with me. It reads in one line, "As in many cases, there are multiple facets to any story, but today Ruby pled guilty because she felt it was the right thing to do for her and her family." And she did admit those in court today by pleading guilty and offering regret to her friends and family. Interesting to note, when she did come into the courtroom, she did smile at those that were in the front row. As Amanda mentioned, that was her mother and father, also her sister, and some other family members. Behind them were detectives from Santa Clara Ivans Public Safety. Other than that, in the courtroom today, a couple other members of the media. There were open seats available, but no members of the public that we were aware of, just there to listen and partake in this. Let's turn our attention to Jake Taylor now. There were a lot in those documents. That plea agreement was more than just the charges outlined, but also looking into an explanation between those 4 counts. Jake, what did you take away? There's a lot of horrific details in those documents that outline that 4-month timeline of those allegations and now admitted child abuse when it comes to Ruby Frankie.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Brian. In these documents that I have here, she doesn't just admit to the crime. She has to get specific into what she did that caused aggravated child abuse. It is tough to hear. It is tough to look at. I'm a dad, and it was difficult to read through some of these details of what happened to these children. Now, as we pull up now some of the specifics, the plea document is clear. In it, Ruby says her actions, quote, involved physical torture. The victims, her 11-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter. Some of the treatment explained in specific detail. Her son forced to stand in the direct southern Utah summer sun for days at a time. The outcome, it resulted in repeated and serious sunburns, blistered and sloughing skin. You can see there how earlier we mentioned that she admitted it, quote, caused physical torture. Also, her son was, quote, punished when he secretly consumed water. Now, in less detail, Ruby admits to other abuse, including, quote, kicking her son while wearing boots, holding his head underwater, and cutting off oxygen by placing her hands over his mouth and his nose. Her 9-year-old daughter, facing much of the same treatment, was also forced to work barefoot in the heat, and, quote, wounds were apparent by scabs, blisters, and sloughing of skin. All of that really difficult to read. And also what's difficult is to see the reasoning that she gave to those children of why this was occurring. The documents also explain that she told the children they were evil and possessed. Also, it makes clear that at least her 9-year-old daughter believed that was the case and believed that they had to go through all of that punishment and torture to be able to, quote, repent of what they were doing. Really difficult, really intense things. And also right here is where Ruby signed the document today saying that all of this is true.
Jake, thank you for going through the details. They are incredibly difficult to listen to process. And I do want you all to know they didn't actually read those in great detail in the courtroom today, which is probably why that hearing only took a few minutes. As a matter of fact, there was no statement from the judge about the actions. It was kind of a formality as we expected. I do think that there was the opportunity or the chance where they were potentially going to go into some of those details. Instead, they kept it out and left it there for people to read in those documents. Again, Jake Taylor looking into that. Now, let's continue to go in depth here with the next steps for this in terms of the other person involved. Her name is Jodi Hildebrandt, business partner to Ruby Franke. As far as we understand it, these two have known each other for at least a few years. And as you heard in the statement last week that Lamar Windward, who is Ruby Franke's attorney, put out to us here just before 5 o'clock Friday night, we shared that with you in its entirety on 2 News Live. It points the finger a lot at Jodi Hildebrandt, the isolation, the manipulation, and truly just those tactics used. Now, in a lot of our coverage, we have talked to people who say they have been victimized by Jodi Hildebrandt. Jodi was not in court today. She will likely appear after the Christmas holiday. Now looking into Jodi, Paul Nelson joining us here on 2 News Live as we continue to go in depth. Paul, what is next for Jodi Hildebrandt? What are you looking into today?
Well, I'm speaking with attorneys who are kind of giving their thoughts on whether or not they believe that Jodi Hildebrandt is actually going to stand trial. And some of the attorneys that I've spoken with say they don't believe that that is actually going to happen. From their experience, they say that it is most likely that Jodi Hildebrandt will be taking a plea deal. Now, the reason why they say that, there's a couple of different reasons why. One of them is that Ruby Franke, they believe, is a very credible witness. They say that if she had just received a simple slap on the wrist, then the jury might not believe her. But she agreed to prison time, which is not a small feat. Also, the other thing that that they think is going to make it so this will avoid trial altogether, the defense teams do not want children victims to be called to the stand. I spoke with Nathan Evershed today. He said that yes, the jurors are instructed to keep their emotions out of it, but that's really impossible, and they have extreme amount of empathy for child victims. And so the defense attorneys just would not want them to take the stand, and that is one reason why that they believe that Jodi Hildebrandt will actually just take a plea deal. It's probably, in their opinion, the best course of action for her.
Are very similar to the folks that I've spoken to over the last few weeks. They also feel that there won't be a trial as it pertains to Jodi Hildebrandt, and that Ruby Franke won't actually formally testify in trial form against Jodi Hildebrandt. And yes, the children and their safety and their futures are paramount in all of this. And I do believe that we will likely see in the next week or so that come out in terms of Jodi's future be put out in form of a plea agreement. Now, how that will look, we are not sure. We didn't really know the specifics of the plea agreement as it pertained to Ruby Franke until they were entered into the public format in court today. We've done a lot of coverage over this, over the last few months. A lot of reports that I've done, my colleagues have done here, Jake Taylor, Paul Nelson, Amanda Gilbert, many of which were included in this program here tonight on 2 News Live. You can find all of our reporting in one place, let's say 2 places. You can find it on KUTV.com, but you can also find it on our YouTube channel if you go to the 8 Passengers playlist. And as we learn more about Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt, we will bring them to you. Well, comfortable here in St. George now. The sun is setting, and I might put on the extra layers because it's starting to cool down after the darkness sets in. So meteorologist Chase Thomason is here with a look at what's coming next. And Chase, not every day I'm in southern Utah, especially on live TV, so it's different for me to be in St. George talking to you tonight, but what's heading our way?
Definitely some cleaner air down in the St. George area, Brian. Of course, because of our geography, we live in a big bowl here in the Salt Lake Valley and many of our mountain valleys in northern Utah. And with this stagnant air mass, we are seeing these strong inversions develop, and we're seeing a lot of pollution trapped underneath that inversion layer, combined with a little bit of fog, especially where we have some water vapor around the Great Salt Lake. We're getting that smog and fog, poor air quality, reduced visibility. So first alert weather for the next few days. Unfortunately, though, there's nothing really significant significant until the weekend. So we're going to be dealing with this poor air. So limit how much time you spend outdoors, especially for sensitive groups. We are in the orange, which is unhealthy for sensitive groups. Children, the elderly, folks with respiratory issues. Now we have a little bit of moisture that might move in Tuesday night into Wednesday. So we might see some mixing, a little bit of improvement with our air quality, but not enough to really blow everything out. But eventually, hopefully by the weekend, we can see something move in and give us a much better air as we head into Christmas. So there's a storm out in the Pacific. It's actually going to be pushing towards the northeast, but a little bit of moisture you'll see over the next 24 to 48 hours. Can't rule out a sprinkler or two. The best chance for those sprinkles might actually happen Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning across portions of western Utah. And then as we head into Thursday and Friday, our next storm system begins to drop in, potentially impacting areas like Arizona and then southern Utah Friday into Saturday. And a cold front might enter northern Utah with rain and snow showers. And this storm system right here will likely bust the inversion and bring us some cleaner air and maybe a little bit of snow, but doesn't look like a huge snowmaker right now, but that could also change, so stay tuned. St. George, we're going to be hovering right around 60 degrees for the rest of the week. More clouds, though, on Wednesday, and then some rain developing late Friday into Saturday, maybe even into Sunday morning. But as we head into Christmas, colder and in the 40s down south. Salt Lake, temperatures staying in the 30s, especially in the lower valleys. It is milder along the benches and especially up in the mountains. Temperatures, though, might moderate a bit by the end of the week, and then we have that storm rolling in with rain and snow Saturday with snow showers Christmas Eve.
All right, Chase, thank you very much. Great to be with you live here in St. George tonight for 2 News Live. Thanks to everyone who contributed to our program tonight, from Jake Taylor to Paul Nelson, Amanda Gilbert, who's live from Hurricane tonight. Of course, everyone behind the scenes back at 2 News Studios, and of course, our photographers making everything happen. If you missed anything here,